Alright guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So in this one, we're going to be breaking down the trade compensation, the potential trade compensation for Zach Wilson on the New York Jets, right? Rich Cimini just released an article not too long ago where he reached out and spoke to numerous sources, I believe it was 2 assistant coaches and 1 scout, on what the Jets could potentially net for Wilson. And compensation isn't, according to these 3 sources, not really looking too promising, but let's see what Cimini had to say. ESPN reached out to 3 personnel executives, 1 scout and 2 assistant coaches from other teams to gauge Wilson's value. The consensus is Wilson could bring back a 6th or a 7th round pick, or perhaps a swap of middle round picks from a team willing to take a chance on him as a backup due to his draft pedigree. Perhaps a team out there felt stronger about him in the pre-draft, and that could influence how they value him, one personnel executive said. Personally, I think there's a bunch of teams that make sense for Zach as that developmental backup. I think the Rams is the one that everybody just jumps to instantly. He'd be working with one of, if not the best offensive mind in football in Sean McVay. He doesn't have to play right away with Matthew Stafford there, and Stafford's a great teammate. He's the ultimate pro. He's a Super Bowl champion, a Detroit Lion legend, a great mentor, in other words. The only catch is that Mike LaFleur is there. And according to the Jets, the only reason why they fired Mike LaFleur was because he couldn't get along with Zach Wilson. That dynamic just didn't work. So, does that influence the Rams' decision-making? Although I could still see it playing out given 1 or 2 possibilities here. Number 1, that report came out over a year ago. So there's a very good chance that Mike LaFleur, Zach Wilson, that these guys have matured. They're adults. They can realize that, hey, on one hand, Zach really needs a change of scenery and you could get him for pennies on the dollar. And then from the organization's perspective, it's, hey, we really need a backup quarterback. We don't have a young developmental guy on the roster that has a really high ceiling. This could work here. So that could play out, right? They could just be more mature, be adults about the situation, and potentially mend that bridge. Or number 2, I hate to say this, but we've seen it from the Jets regime before. They could have just lied, right? Or over-exaggerated the relationship between the two, and Mike LaFleur was just a scapegoat. Somebody had to get fired. The defense is great, so we're going to look at the offensive guy. The offense wasn't getting it done. And it's not to say that Mike LaFleur was perfect. As Jets fans, we all know that he wasn't. He definitely had his flaws, but, to fire him and then for the excuse to be, well, he couldn't work with Zach and whatnot is that was pretty eye-opening. So we've seen Saleh lie to the media before. There is a chance that it happened then. So if Wilson ends up with the LA Rams, I think I think at the end of the day, it would make sense for LA, and it also would make sense for Zach. Personally, the team that I feel like makes the most sense, though, is the Minnesota Vikings, right? O'Connell comes from the McVay tree. He constantly wins games with just a turnstile at quarterback. Nick Mullins, Kirk Cousins, Jared Hall, Josh Dobbs, right? He won a bunch of games last season. They were kind of in a position like the Jets, right? Cycling through different backup quarterbacks. But they were competitive in football games, and O'Connell's young. He's a former quarterback. I think he could be looking at Zach saying, we can add him to the room. He has that really high upside. He has playmaking ability, a big arm, mobility. I like those traits. I think he has more natural talent than Dobbs, than Mullins, than some of these guys I've been working with. Even if Kirk Cousins is brought back, I still feel like the Vikings make a ton of sense for Zach. But let's see what Cimini has to say here. Another quote was, otherwise, maybe they could ask for something on day 3, a mid-day 3, meaning a pick in the 5th or 6th round range. The scout said that the Jets could get a 7th round pick, quote unquote, if they're lucky. One of the assistant coaches said, quote unquote, I would give up a 2-week stay at a Best Western. Man, I'm not a fan. So I think it's pretty clear that the Jets aren't going to be getting back like a Sam Darnold-esque return for Zach. I think the hope is, that the Jets can maybe net what the 49ers got for Trey Lance. It's a bit of a different situation, but, 2 top quarterbacks drafted, literally back-to-back at 2 and 3. I think you would hope for a 4th if you're one of the fans that wants to move on from Zach. I know there's a big group of people that want the Jets to hang on to him, right? He still has the upside. He's had horrendous coaching, right? I mean, Nathaniel Hackett being his offensive coordinator last year, you can make an argument he gets a mulligan just for that, not including not having a lot of weapons, not including playing behind a bad offensive line. Despite Zach being extremely inconsistent, not really all that inspiring at the quarterback position, he has flash and he does have that upside. Right, I think the big thing with Zach here is consistency. Can he be the same quarterback week in, week out? Can we just get him on the bench and soak up the NFL game, learn from a veteran backup without the pressure of being the savior, pressure of going out there and performing every single week in like a win now season? Another quote here: the only trade value for him is his arm talent, meaning he can make all the throws, the other assistant coach said of Wilson. But the biggest thing, he has to become more mature and be consistent. Yes, this is what we were just talking about, be more consistent in everything, especially his decision making. There were flashes of this this year, but obviously not enough. Again, that's the biggest thing with Zach. You just never know what you're going to get. It's not, we don't really have a crazy roller coaster ride where it's 4 TDs, then 4 picks, and then 350 passing yards, and down to 90 passing yards. It's not that big, right? We haven't seen the consistent highs, but there's a play or two per game where you're like, man, not a lot of quarterbacks can make that throw. Or he does have a solid game. He doesn't turn the football over. He follows it up with just, an eyesore. Samiti then goes on to point out different quarterback trades that have happened in the last couple of seasons. Nick Mullins from the Raiders to the Vikings for a conditional 7th. Stidham from the Pats to the Raiders for 6th. Keenum from the Browns to the Bills for 7th. Flacco from the Eagles to the Jets for a conditional 6th. Minshew from the Jags to the Eagles for a conditional 6th. So the idea here, if you're in favor of trading Zach, I just don't know what the value at the end of the day is going to be. I just don't know if it's going to be all that high, given the track record, given the current circumstances and whatnot. So we'll see how this thing plays out. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. I think it's a super interesting discussion / debate. Do you want to keep Zach? Or do you want to trade him? But if you trade him, how low are you willing to go? Because I think, to me, there is a certain, there is a drop-off point where it's like, okay, if we're talking about a 2025 7th round pick, I think at that point it would be pretty debatable on, whether or not to keep Wilson or just deal him for that. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, go Jets.